the way that the father, or the way that the mother, the borderline mother, creates the rejection of the other parent is by getting the child to believe they're being victimized by normal range parenting. Now, I want to explain a little bit where that comes from. And that's that next page on the handout with the blue diagrams down here. Now, that's Aaron Beck at the top. Aaron Beck, again, is one of the top people in professional psychology. And he talks about schemas in our attachment networks. Our attachment system forms patterns of relationships, expectations. What do I expect from myself and from the other in relationship? And then we use these patterns, these schemas, to guide our interpersonal relationships throughout our lifespan. What happens for the narcissistic or borderline parent is they had childhood trauma of their own. That's what created their narcissistic and borderline parent, is that they came out of child trauma, psychological or physical, potentially sexual abuse of them as a child that created their narcissistic and borderline personality pathology. And in their attachment networks are these patterns. John Bowlby calls them internal working models. Beck calls them schema. Freud called it the transference. We know what this was happening. We have these patterns in the brain. Now, when the divorce takes place, those patterns reactivate again. And the pattern in the narcissistic brain is very specific. It's abusive parent, victimized child, protective parent. We have that schema pattern, that trauma pattern in the internal working models of the narcissistic borderline parent. Abusive parent, victimized child, protective parent. In addition, the brain is also activating 3 networks for the current child, the other parent, and me as a parent. And it's the activation of 2 sets of brain networks, one from the past, abusive parent, victimized child, protective parent, one from the current situation, the other parent, the child, and me. And when we activate those 2 sets of brain networks at the same time, they become fused, they become equivalent. So we actually have this parent believing that the other parent is an abusive parent, this child is being victimized, and I'm the protective parent. It's called a trauma reenactment. They are reenacting their own childhood trauma in the current situation. The issue is, none of that narrative is true. The child is not being victimized, the other parent isn't abusive, and you're not a protective parent. It's all a false drama, it's all a false narrative, a kabuki theater that is created, and the moment they get the child to believe they're being victimized, that automatically defines the other parent as abusive. You can't have a victimized child unless you have an abusive parent. I don't care what that parent has done or what the parenting, they've automatically been defined as the abusive parent, and then it allows the narcissistic parent or borderline parent to come in and be the protective parent. I'm protecting the child from the abusive parent, and the child says, yes, I'm being abused. The child comes into my office and says, my dad abuses me. I say, well, what's he do? He says, he took my iPhone away. Well, that's not abuse. Why did he take your iPhone away? Well, because I was mouthing off and wouldn't do what he said. That's called discipline. That's not called abuse. But you can hear that, how it forms when the child goes back to their mom and says, Dad took my iPhone away. Oh, I can't believe that. He's so insensitive to you. And she creates this false belief in the child that the child's being victimized. And so the child runs out to the therapists and lawyers and the judge and says, yes, I'm being abused. If you don't explore that to the next level, what do you mean being abused? Took my iPhone away. If you just buy the abuse, oh, yeah, okay. Dad's being a problem. Dad's too insensitive to the child's feelings or whatever. And people start to believe the false narrative that's being created. Now, is there authentic child abuse? Absolutely. I worked in the foster care system. When I was working early childhood, I worked with kids in the foster care system. Electrical cords, sexual abuse. There's absolutely child abuse out there. The way I explain it is, dogs exist. Child abuse exists. Cats exist. The narcissistic borderline personality pathology of a parent exists. The existence of dogs does not nullify the existence of cats, nor does the existence of cats nullify the existence of dogs. Both of them exist. Now the issue is, both dogs and cats have fur, 4 legs, and a tail. So how do we tell them apart? Well, cats have retractable claws. Dogs don't. Cats go meow. Dogs bark. And we can actually look at their DNA and tell them apart. So if you know where to look, you can tell them apart. And that becomes the important thing for the solution, is to understand where this pathology comes from and what it is. Cross-generational coalition, you'll see the inverted hierarchy. Trauma reenactment, you'll see the belief, the false belief in the child that they're being victimized when they're not. The attachment-related pathology in a child that is extraordinarily unusual, extraordinarily rare. If you know where to look, you can identify the difference between a dog and a cat. But right now, we don't have the professional expertise out there to do that. This type of pathology involves the attachment system, personality disorder pathology, family systems pathology, and complex trauma. We need expertise in those 4 domains from our mental health professionals, and right now we don't have it. There's not a mental health professional working with this type of pathology who has the necessary level of expertise. Essentially, what I describe to people is we currently have plumbers and electricians doing open heart surgery, and all the patients are dying. And they may be wonderful plumbers, they may be wonderful electricians, but they are not cardiac surgeons. We need the top level of expertise out there to deal with this very complicated, very severe form of attachment-related family pathology. In mental health's interface with the court system, I don't blame the court system. A lot of people say, oh, it's a problem in the court system. This is not the court system's problem to diagnose psychopathology. That's us, that's psychology. If we don't come with the professional expertise necessary for the court system to act, then the court system doesn't get the proper guidance and they don't know what to do on this. So that frames up the core of the solution. Skipping a couple pages here into the diagnostic indicators up here. So my book, Foundations. What I did in Foundations, and the reason it's called Foundations, is I wrote and described what this pathology is in great detail and comprehensively, using only standard and established constructs and principles. Every time I refer to the word parental alienation, I always put it in quotes, because I don't, as a clinical psychologist, parental alienation doesn't exist. Personality pathology exists, attachment pathology exists, complex trauma exists, cross-generational coalition. I know what all of that stuff is. Parental alienation is a popular culture term that and I don't care, everybody else can use that phrase to kind of capture the complex nature of the pathology, the legal system, and people in the general population. For us as clinical psychologists, though, we need to stop using that word and go back to standard and established stuff.